Let us start. We've got one final session, one surprise session I'm going to sneak in there, and then kind of a wrap up at the very end. So we're going to start with talking about SignalR. The easiest way, I'm going to talk about browsers, and I'm going to show you browser examples, but the easiest way to think about SignalR, remember Visual Studio refreshing those browsers at the beginning where I would update something in the code and immediately would update those browsers. Think about that happening not just with browsers, that can happen with any kind of client. But we've already seen, you make a change in one place and something happens instantly, right? So here's where we're at. Right, so we'll be talking about real-time web, ASP.NET SignalR. We'll look at a very simple example so that the code makes sense, and then we'll look at adding it into that Geek Quiz sample. And that's that. So there's been a problem in web development for a while in that it's always easy for a browser to ask a server a question, right? Browsers know how to find servers, DNS, all that kind of stuff. So I can say, Microsoft.com, give me your home page, and the server says, yep, and then the server forgets that client ever existed, right? So the server, if the server later said, oh, and I also wanted to forget it because the client it's disconnected, right? So clients can ask servers questions, but servers cannot maintain that can't keep pushing data back to clients. The way that we've worked around this in the past is clients keep asking the server if there's something new, right? Because that's the only way that we can kind of keep this conversation going. And then finally the server says, yes, here's some data, and then what do we do again? You just keep asking, right? So this is how we used to do things. Like, think about a website that has stock information, or it has changes, that are constantly occurring. Maybe a chat client, a web chat client. That's how we used to make this work, is we would just keep pinging away at the server. Well, there's some newer technologies, especially WebSockets, that allow for a much smoother kind of conversation. So there's this quick negotiation. Can we speak intelligently? Yes, we can. And then that's what happens. So really, you end up with just this kind of connection. It's a constant connection between client and server. Right? So we're taking advantage of a lot of different transports here. WebSockets is the best one for this, but we fall all the way back to that long polling thing that we saw before. Long polling is, hey, 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 that kind of thing. So another thing that SignalR does for us is it gives us events. So we can use an event-based model because handling the task and async can be a little bit overkill or difficult for a lot of kind of simple, conversations. And some other nice things. Yeah. This last thing on the list here, auto-negotiating transport, is a big deal. And the thing that SignalR specifically does for us is that it allows us to take advantage of real-time communication using the best kind of transport available. So if we are working with, if we have a modern web server and we have 5 clients running, IE11 and whatever the latest Google Chrome is and the latest Firefox, those all support WebSockets, and so they're going to be using that, right? And then somebody dials up and they're at work and their mean boss makes them use IE6, that's okay. We'll fall back to this, right? And that's a big deal. A lot of implementations you'll see for real-time web applications, if you go using an older browser, they'll say, sorry, come back when you've got Chrome, or come back when you've got IE11, right? And so this allows us to, for each browser, make the best connection with them that we can, and still support everybody. Make sense? So this is automatically handled between client and server. There's a JavaScript library in your client page, and then the server, ASP.NET, SignalR code, they just talk back and forth, and it's automatically negotiated. Everybody's talking together, so we've got a chat. 18 people using WebSockets and a few people using forever frames or long polling, that's okay, it all works. And, all right, so let's look at some code. For this example, I'm going to show you the example where this finally made sense to me. I understood what I was trying to do, but I didn't understand how the code model worked. And so this sample is very simple, but it really kind of was how it clicked for me. So the idea is we've got an HTML page and JavaScript and a SignalR backend hub. It's not an ASP.NET application. This is just HTML JavaScript on the front end. Okay? So what we've got is a div that's a hit counter. And what's going to happen is we've got this hub sitting here listening on the server, and every time a client connects, we're going to keep track. Okay, another person connected, another person connected. And we're just going to keep raising that count. So let's actually run this real quick and see what this looks like. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, right? And of course, I mean, this would work with any browser. And there's actually an example, and it's not very much, it's not hard to do, where you know, this would work with a phone application, this would work with whatever you want, right? Okay, now as I disconnect those clients, they count back down. So the job here is the server is keeping track of how many people are connected, and the clients are just checking in, and then anytime they get a notification, the number changed, then they show that. Okay? So let's walk through how that works. First of all, we establish a connection. Okay? So we're creating a proxy. Essentially, this is, I'll get back to that in a second, what that means. So there are two things. First of all, we say whenever the server calls on hit recorded, so whenever the server calls back to me with this on hit recorded method, then I'm going to update using jQuery. I'm going to update that div with the number it passes me. So this is me receiving a notification from the server, right? And then we say, okay, now that that's set up, as soon as the hub is started up, as soon as things are up and running on the server, then we're going to call this server method called record hit. Okay? So here we're already kind of, some things are clicking here hopefully. When you've got a constant connection between the server and the client, you use this proxy, and it allows JavaScript to call a C# method on the server, right? Or C# to call a JavaScript method because of this proxy. So they're constantly connected, and I can say, yeah, I'm in JavaScript on the client, but let's just call this server method. And then the server's humming along, and it says, yeah, let's just call this JavaScript method, okay? Because that's what SignalR is giving to us. So when things have started up, we call record hit on the server. What does that look like? Here's our hub. We've got a count. We've got this hit count. And then when record hit, this is a server-side method, and then we used a JavaScript proxy to call it. And all this does is say, okay, we're recording another hit to the site, or another connected client. So we add 1 to our static count. And then we want to call back to all the connected clients and tell them that the number has changed. So we're calling this proxy, we're saying all clients call on hit recorded and pass this number to them. Okay, and then popping back over here, on hit recorded just does this. Right? Hopefully this is all making sense. I'm going over it in a little bit of detail, but I think this is really key. Once you get this, server can call client methods, C# can call JavaScript, JavaScript can call C#. A few other things I want to point out real quick. A connection is this low-level transport. This is if you want to get in and really kind of control what's going on. You can, if you want, you can use a hub. And the hub is a kind of lighter weight abstraction. It's simpler to work with. If you can use a hub, I would recommend it until you run into something where you're like, okay, I really need to get down in there and control things in more detail. So that's it on the JavaScript side. Some things to notice on the server. One is we've taken care of adding whenever more clients connect. But how do we handle disconnection, right? Well, this is where, remember I said we can take advantage of events on the server. So SignalR is giving us this on disconnected event, and there are other ones we can take advantage of too. On disconnected says every time somebody a client disconnects, then we're going to subtract one, and then we'll just call again, clients.all.onHitRecorded. So that's it. Another thing I want to point out while we're in this is, you notice there's clients.all, and there are some other options, right? So we can say clients.client. This is if we want to pass a message just to, I send a message to the server, and the server wants to tell me I got it or something like that, and doesn't need to broadcast it. It could do that. There's also clients.group, and so you can send a message to a group. You can send a message to everyone else in the group except yourself, so that would be like others in group. An example of this would be like a chat client. If I type in a message, well, I don't need the server to tell the message back to me, right? I want to tell it to everyone else in my chat group, right? So that's kind of that idea. Of course, chat's just a simple example. You can use this for, advanced business applications and all kinds of stuff. As an example of that, let's look at the biggest, the largest implementation of SignalR right now that I'm aware of, and that is Office.com. So this is, of course, where I can go in and I can create, like as an example, when Matt and I were preparing some of this content, we went in, we used Outlook, and it's using SignalR in the back end to allow this constant connection. So if I create a new, actually, let me see. Well, SignalR team notes, that's kind of funny. But I could create a new one, I believe. So if I go in, oh, that's not what I wanted. I'm all confused. Well, so if I created a document, I can start typing, and I can share it with someone else, and they can start typing as well. So that's the point I wanted to show. So SignalR originally started as these two guys, David Fowler, who chatted me earlier this morning, and Damian Edwards, and they're developers. David is a developer, and Damian is a program manager at Microsoft, and they were just hacking away at this in weekends and at nights and stuff. And then after a while, it was like, hey, this thing's pretty cool. And so they actually, it still is an open source project, but it's officially supported by Microsoft and shipped with ASP.NET. So you can do file new, and you can actually let's go in here. I'm going to create a new application, and I could, or inside of an ASP.NET application, I can add in SignalR, right? So if I create a new MVC app, I can, right-click and add in a SignalR hub. So this is something you may not have known. This originally shipped in Visual Studio 2012.2. All right. So for instance, I'm just, quickly, if I go right-click, add new item, and I filter this and type SignalR. Oops, I don't know which one I added. So I added a hub, right? So this is a very quick way to start playing around with this. It doesn't take any kind of special setup, and it'll automatically pull in the things that you need. So there's that. There's also, if you want to learn more, if you go to the ASP.NET site /SignalR, and this has a lot of information in there as well. So tutorials and documentation and stuff. When it was early, when I was first learning about it, it changed quite a bit. It was obvious that it was an open source project that some guys had been hacking on. As soon as it became an official platform that Office.com was running on and stuff, it got more serious. So it's the documentation's actually really pretty good. Okay, so we have looked at a simple, very simple Hello World example. So now let's add this into our Geek Quiz application. And the idea here is that we want to, as people are answering questions, remember how we had that Excel app, and when we clicked the button, it updated the chart. So wouldn't it be cool if we did that actually inside the web app as well? So that is, this one. So again, we're using a hub in the back end. And what's going to happen is the clients are connected to the hub, and the hub, whenever somebody answers a question, there's a call inside of our services that's going to call into that hub. So first, let's look at our hub. You're going to be a little shocked at how little code there is here. No code. All right. So all we're doing is declaring a hub. This is just a hub that exists. And then we're actually going to access this hub from inside our statistics service. So whenever questions are answered, we're calling notify updates. So this is actually, I'm kind of jumping around a bit, but whenever somebody answers a question, then there's a call over to notify updates. Notify updates calls generate statistics. And then here's the thing that should be familiar. The hub, clients all update statistics. So it just sends that message out. And then if we look in here, I'm going to search for update statistics. We'll find it hopefully in one other place. Great. So this is in the statistics view. And there's a little bit of code here, but it's actually not too bad. So really we've got some inline code that sets up our model. So we have some statistics, a statistics model. It's just JSON code. And then we show the original chart using that. So the first time that this page is requested, it actually sends all the data down. We don't have to wait. So then afterwards, we're just listening. And whenever we're notified, whenever we're called from the server, again, we call show charts. And the show charts is pretty cool. This is actually using a system called Flot, which is one of many graphics libraries. And this one, I believe, is using Canvas. There's also others that use SVG. This one, we ended up using this one instead. So, but it's really, it gets some data, and then it calls into the Flot library and says draw some stuff. So let's run this. So part of what we've been trying to do with this example, with this geek quiz, is to show, building an application and then using the back-end services to do quite a bit more. So, here's a very simple application, and it's a single-page app, but we decided to use Web API. Well, because of that, then we can use Excel, and we could use a phone application, we can use a Windows 8 application to access that. And then also we can start exposing those services using using SignalR as well. So here I go to, I believe, home statistics. Right. So there's that. So I'm going to pop that over on the side, create a new instance, and we'll go back to home. Right, so you can see it's updating as it goes. And then this, if we scroll down, these are also those updates here, which is kind of neat. So this is an example of something this was something we developed. We work with a small team, 2 or 3 devs, and we built this out for build last year. And it was pretty cool. Like once we decided what we were doing, it actually wasn't a huge amount of work. This was the front end was Ember.js. The back end, we used Web API and SignalR. And then it was pretty much like, hey, we've got stuff on the server, and we'll send JSON down to the client, and some of it will be real time using SignalR, and some of it will be just be using Web API, and it all just kind of worked. So that example is, if we go to one show you an example of where I can find this. when you install, I'm trying to think what the best way to do this. When you install these demos, you will get a, so, demo. There's an HTML thing that'll walk you through doing this. So single page, real time, there it is. So the HTML that's installed looks like this. So it'll kind of walk you through exactly what to do. So part of what we're doing today is we had the decision of we can cover a little bit information in tons of detail, or we can show you a lot of information in a little less detail, but we can give you the resources to dig more into it. So that's an example here. This explains exactly kind of how we set this up. All right, so that is this one, and then there's actually, if you want more detail than that, there is also some hands-on labs. So we have some HOL. So actually, they're in a different repository, but there's 5 hands-on labs that go into more detail than that. So I think that, let me see, I have, this session actually is supposed to go until 3:30, and it usually, surprisingly, ends up, it's a very cool topic, but it's actually really quick to show usually. So what I'm planning on is I can take some questions on this, I can show a couple other kind of just neat samples of things people are doing with SignalR. And then I also wanted to show you a sneak peek of what we're looking at for the next version of ASP.NET. Does that sound good? So do we have, let me just pop up a few kind of fun little things that people have done. While you're thinking, anyone have any questions on this or other things?
I was wondering, how is it IntelliSense figuring out that, when you are calling message from the client, the name of the method is, the naming convention is different.
Yeah.
C# than the JavaScript. So.
Well, you'll notice in this one that they actually use, the lowercase JavaScript style. Mm-hmm. So in this, but they're actually dynamic methods. So there is an IntelliSense for these. So they're actually declared as a dynamic type. So if I go into this, well, this one won't help me. Let me go back over into the hit counter one.
One is counter and one is
yeah. So for instance here, you'll notice this still, right? So this is the proxied one. And if I said clients.all, zoom in on that, dynamic expression. So, and this is good and bad, right? This is this means that it's generated at runtime from whatever's in JavaScript. On the other hand, there's no IntelliSense for it. Okay. And what's happening here is actually pretty fascinating. If we go in, we run this again, and we'll view source. And you'll see, let me see. Well, there's actually, one of the things in here is /SignalR/hubs. Okay, so let me browse to that instead, And so this is actually a bunch of JavaScript. So now, IE likes to, when you give it JavaScript, it wants it to open it as a file. I'm going to go into Chrome because it happens to not do that. So we'll go there. We'll go /SignalR. Okay. So what's happening here is that this is a script reference in JavaScript calling into our hub, and the hub is generating this dynamic proxy. So what's important here is if I search for this for on hit, or let me see, record. Okay. So here is this record hit, right? So it actually, this doesn't, but you can see here, this is whatever. It's generating this on the fly. Okay. So that's kind of a lot of the magic of what SignalR does. It's abstracting the transports, but it's also building this proxy for us at runtime. So C# can call JavaScript, and JavaScript can call C#. Great question, by the way. Yeah?
Is there a reason why you did SignalR and Web API, as if you only use SignalR for all the complications?
That's a great question. So the question is there a reason to use SignalR or Web API? Well, Web API is really good for HTTP type services, right, where you want to do this kind of get, put, post, delete. It doesn't require a special client library. Any client can speak HTTP. Also, HTTP services can be cached and other things like that, right, whereas SignalR is really good for this if you need real time. You can also hit scaling. SignalR does scale really well, but you have to remember if you've got one server and hundreds of thousands of clients, they're all connecting to it, right? And SignalR does some really cool things with actually, I should have said that in general chat. There's more people there. But this is a kind of a it's a chat, and it's a great chat system for a lot of .NET developers. There's always people hanging out on here. So. Did someone say hi? Someone probably said hi. Anyhow, okay. So Jabber is one application. Your question reminded me, though, of a great example, and this is a site called Consensus. And Consensus is actually an application that this guy, Nick Berardi, built. And I think this will do it. So the idea here is pulling together some different things. This is SignalR and a front end using AngularJS. And this is also using TypeScript, which is, I'm not getting into that today, but it's a language that compiles to JavaScript but gives you type safety and some other nice things. So here he built out a, there's hubs. So his standard, this is a planning poker thing. So this is kind of common for people doing agile planning, and it's a way of kind of bidding on things that you want. So here there's a hub, and then for the actual script, this is using Angular and binding to that. So Angular or other single-page applications don't care how they got the data. It could be from a GET request to a service, or it could be to something like SignalR. It doesn't really matter to them, right? So if I run this, this is going to allow me to create a room, and so and then I can create a room, for example. And then I can go, if I have a few people logged in, they can go and do this also. And so let's do that. Let's create a new one. Right, so here let's, if I forget what I want to do here. I want to actually create another, or I could reset the room. I could create another logged in player, so I would need to log out. But anyhow, this one is kind of several people connect, and they all are working with it at the same time. I talked to one person I presented this to, and they said, I work at a restaurant, and we want to notify people when their table is ready. Could we use SignalR for that? Absolutely. One really nice thing about SignalR is that there are libraries for a lot of different platforms. So, let me see, GitHub, SignalR. So there are libraries for, here's a Java client, here is, they have other ones. They have libraries for iOS and Android and all kinds of stuff, Xamarin. So it's very flexible. Of course, Windows Phone, all kinds of stuff.
Hey, John, just to add to that question, I think it was a very good question.
Yeah.
One of the things that ASP.NET Web API does really well is creating whole data services. How many people here use or know data? Okay. So when you create an old data, traditional web services, they usually have something like get customer by ID, and then you give an ID as a parameter. And that works really well until your manager says, well, now we need to be able to search customers by name. There you go. You have to change your web service, create a new version, deploy, just because now you have this new thing. What OData does is give you almost like what SQL does was put in a web service. So I can say HTTP, web, my web service, like customers, and then I can start filtering by whatever column I want, selecting whatever column I want, order by, calculate things. So basically, you're giving the entity and letting the client decide how they want to search and query, filter, whatever. See, this is super powerful because, for example, if your table has 50 columns, maybe your iOS app only wants 2 columns. So now you can actually say, actually, when you give me the customers, just give me the name and the ID. I don't care about anything else. Now the table is really small. So it's super flexible, and you're building a web service for whatever scenarios people want, not just for the scenarios you think they would want. Look at Facebook, for example, right? They have a query language, so you can go to Facebook APIs and say, list all my friends where country equals Finland and age is greater than 30, right? So I can actually tell Facebook exactly the range of data I want. And these filters go all the way to the database, so it's super efficient. It's a much better way of building web services moving forward. And if you guys look at Office 365, or any of our cloud services, they are all moving towards that direction. So I can actually today query your mailbox. So search my mailbox with a simple HTTP query where subjects start with whatever and date range is whatever, and just get those emails from that. So it's super easy.
Yeah, and what's really key about what he said there is the queries are in the URL.
Yeah.
And they don't require any kind of special configuration to set up, and they don't require the client to know really anything about that. They just hit that URL. Another thing, some people, so when OData was first announced, there was an OData specification, and there was XML and stuff, and people got really worried about that. And I don't want to deal with OData. But you can use this OData query syntax without using any of the data format. And there's also a very lightweight OData OData data format that's JSON-based, and it's very, very lightweight. Here's an example. I'm opening up a project I created this morning, and I'm saying I would like to create an OData web API to OData controller with actions using AnyFrame. So this is one where I had previously, scaffolded out using just web API and stuff. So here I'm going to say I would like my model class as person and models, and I think let's call this person OData controller. So what I want to show, I believe this has query examples in the comments. I sure hope it does. But basically, it sets up this OData thing. Let's look at the controller. Did I delete it? What is happening? Honestly, I don't know what I did. Oh, here it is. Here it is. There it is. Where'd it go? I don't see it. Oh, it put it in the root. That's interesting. Okay, so here's the OData thing. It puts these queryable things. That's what enables that, right? And then you can bind to this from OData URI, and there's really kind of rich. Oh, it supports things like patch and merge and stuff. And shoot, I think let's just take a look because I'm sure that there are.
Search for OData by example.
This one right here.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is from 2010. Don't get scared about the XML because we want the query syntax.
There we go.
I don't know about this. here's an example here, categories 4. What I was going to do, this one's okay here. This shows drilling in on something, right?
Yeah,
Give me the second.
For example, like select count, you can do categories, slash count, how many categories are there. Then you can do $filter equals and start filtering by columns. Then you can do $select and start selecting specific fields.
Yep.
There's
Query
one.
options.
Order by, see order by categories there.
Yep.
Format, select, skip. You can page things.
Yeah. Paging is a great one, actually. So that's one of the things I was thinking of. If we go to the ASP.NET site, I work. One of the things I do is I select these community things. Somebody wrote a tutorial on OData operators for Web API pagination. And that should have been in my head when we started talking about OData. But here he walks through this and then shows, exactly the same thing, scaffolding it out. And what's nice is it's very easy to, bind to it. Where is this thing?
He's doing the top and skip there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So very easy to, very, efficiently just get the data you want. Right? All right. I would like to show a 10, 15-minute look at something we're looking at for ASP.NET vNext. If your head is already spinning, don't worry. This won't be on the test. This is just fun stuff. Part of what we're seeing is, as things are converging, we're seeing a lot of common themes, and we want to support. And we think that the platform is now at a place where we can do that more easily. So, get this back on. Okay. So, this is from a tech ed presentation that Mads Christensen just gave. Some of the main things that we're looking at here is, one, bring your own tools. So we know web developers are, they're both, a picky bunch, and we also, we're coming up with new stuff all the time, right? Now it's Grunt, now it's Gulp, now it's this, now it's that. And so the idea is we really want Visual Studio to work well with all of that. Especially like Grunt, Bower, NPM are things that we've been working on specifically. And Mads just demoed at TechEd. So if you watch his presentation from TechEd, he shows using this. We are working on a new project system. So CS Proj based, we've had support for a while for websites and web projects. Who here knows what I'm talking about? Who here uses websites at all? Everyone uses web applications mostly. So there were two ways of doing this. A project is something that has, a list of all your files, and it has all your build information and all that in there. That's what I've been showing today. And then there's also this thing we had for a while or we've supported since 2005, called websites, and it's where you just point it at a directory. You say, this is where all my stuff is, it's in this directory. And then it goes and it compiles everything in there. But there's some kind of pros and cons to both of them. It's not easy to exclude things from a website. Web projects are kind of clunky because they have a list of all your files in them, and changing something is a pain with version control and all kinds of things. So we're working on a new system that's a lightweight JSON file that allows you to specify things or exclude things, but basically gives you the advantages of a website project and a web application. Another thing is, this new version is, we're actually developing it, and that guy David that was pinging me earlier, developed it command line first. So it will have amazing, fantastic, wonderful support in Visual Studio. It's actually technically not released. They haven't released the Visual Studio tooling yet, even the preview of it. So the first preview was just command line only. The reason is we want to make sure from the beginning that you can automate this, that it's, is very flexible and portable. And okay, to keep an eye on where the tools are going specifically, you can go, if you go to vswebessentials.com, click on download, and you scroll to the bottom, there's this nightly, nightly installer. And that's what I use, and I like it. And seriously, there's new features like every 2 days. It's great. Okay, so here's the big thing. So I kind of alluded to it, talking about this new project system and things. Some of the reasons for where we're going, one is .NET is changing rapidly. There's want to deploy things to the cloud. It's moved from being just a simple lightweight desktop thing. NuGet gives us a ton of flexibility now. As I showed you with creating a new web application, it's got a packages.config, and that lists all the functionality that's in your ASP.NET site. And finally, we want to, you may have noticed we've been saying open source, open source, open source all day long today. And it's not because we're trying to convince you that we're open source, like it just is. That's how we do things. And so Web API, MVC are open source, SignalR is open source, Web Essentials is open source. Basically everything we do now, we just, Entity Framework is open source. So everything we do, we just intend to do open source. It just works better for us. It works better for everyone. Some of the best features in MVC5 were committed by open source developers outside of Microsoft. So they had some cool features. We collaborated with them. We said, hey, we'd like to include this. They said, that's great. They signed things saying we won't sue you and everyone in the world if they use our stuff. And then we took their code, and then everyone's happy. And we support that code, and it's great. So we want to go farther with that. So, and as an example, we've just started this .NET Foundation. You'll see on this list a lot of the things I just mentioned. SignalR, Web API, MVC. One of the kind of surprises recently is that one there, the .NET compiler. So the actual C# compiler is open source now. And this is a compiler as a service. What that means, it's not like a web service. It's a I don't know. It's a service. It's a code service. So the idea is it's something running on my computer. I pass it, or when I compile something, I pass it some text. I say, here's some code, and it says, great, here's the compiled results. And so you can just pass back and forth to it. You can call into it and say, here's some code, and it says, here's some compiled results. What that allows us to do is a lot of things. One, the Visual Studio tools can take a ton more advantage of what's going on, and on the fly can understand your code better. But it also means that our compiler can be portable. Since it's open source, it's cross-platform, so it can actually run on Linux or OS X or whatever. Like that's the goal, is to make sure that we have broad support, right? And of course, still continues to be supported and maintained by Microsoft. It's not the open source, we don't care. It's the open source, we love this, we want to share it. Okay. So what we're looking at for the next version, this is MVC6, including Web API and web pages. So totally modular, meaning, like we saw those NuGet packages, they're going to continue to be more NuGet packages, and they're going to be smaller. The idea is so that you can pick exactly what you want. You don't do file new project and have 40 megabytes. You do file new project and have exactly what you want. Seamless transition from on-premises to cloud. So the idea is we're working on this as a cloud optimized framework, meaning that the smaller packages, things that work very well on the server, and actually a profile of .NET that is intended just for web hosting. So the idea is, .NET, the .NET framework includes a lot of things in it, like desktop graphics, printing support, right? All kinds of things that you don't need in your web application when you're deploying to Azure or something. So, so the idea is actually a separate platform or a separate profile of .NET that's just intended for hosting. Right from the beginning, open source with contributions. So meaning it's open source and other people can contribute code to us. Faster development cycle. What this means is you may know that you can edit content files in ASP.NET applications, including like view code. So I can go into CS/HTML and modify that and refresh the page. But what if I could modify my controller code or my models without rebuilding. I just change my controller and then refresh my browser, and it's there. That's the idea. How could we do this? Roslyn. Remember I mentioned that Roslyn compiler is a service? So as you're typing, files are being watched, and we say, oh, okay, you modified this file, let me rebuild that. Build succeeded, great. That's the live version in your development environment, right? So it's continuous. As I mentioned before, your own editors and tools. So this will work great if you want to use Notepad and command line. This will work amazingly well, of course, in Visual Studio. And it also will work on a Mac. This will work, if you want to use TextMate on a Mac. What this means, and this is, I think, kind of mind-blowing, this means that we would be completely happy with, Joe web developer who has a MacBook Pro, develops, ASP.NET vNext on his MacBook Pro, deploys it to Azure websites, and never used Windows at all. That's okay. He's still paying us money, right, for Azure. And we're just generally happy that, for the platform to grow. So, kind of wild, open source, new world. So I mentioned some things about, this cloud-optimized profile. So vNext, we're calling ASP.NET vNext. Everything is supported in this vNext. So all of these things, and that includes, web forms, existing MVC5 app, whatever you've got, all of these things, open source, faster deployment, cloud ready, all that good stuff. If you're building with MVC6 and going forward, then there are two more things we'll be able to do. So all side-by-side frameworks. What this means is currently now on your websites, let's say you've got an MVC4 application. You've got MVC4 on your server, and you'd really like to use MVC5, and you tell your IT guy, or I would like to deploy the newest. Sorry, not MVC. Let's say you've got .NET 3.5 installed on your server, and you'd like to use .NET 4.5. You have to go and talk to your IT person and say, can we please put .NET 4.5? And they say, well, that might break something else. I don't know, right? What this does is the .NET framework is so small and compartmentalized, it actually comes along with your application. So that means you can have multiple versions of .NET installed on the same server, and they don't conflict in any way. Kind of interesting. The other thing is, again, since they're so small and lightweight, very quick startup, etc. So, I believe, okay, so here's kind of how that previous slide works out. If you've got, existing applications, web forms, MVC5, Web API 2, etc., all that stuff completely supported will run on this vNext. If you're building brand new MVC6, you get all the vNext stuff plus, because it's this kind of subset, then we can do multiple versions, we can do really quick startup, we can do this new cloud optimized profile. And if you are on MVC or Web API existing, like say MVC5, moving from MVC5 to MVC6, relatively small amount of breaking changes, not too many. And I think with that I should probably show, yeah, a quick demo. So again, don't worry if this is sounding crazy. It'll make more sense when somebody smarter than me explains it at Build or Tech Ed or whatever. But here's an example where I went and downloaded, and let me show you where I got it from. So I went to GitHub, or actually if I go to ASP.NET/vNext, that is the first place where you can kind of find out about this. So if you click on this, ASP.NET vNext, it explains the things that I tried to. And it also will show on here how to go and download some example code. Okay, so it'll give you a link over to the GitHub repository. So I just downloaded the zip file and put it on my desktop. Okay, so we'll go over there, CD desktop. We want to go to, I think, hello. Okay. All right. So I have this thing called KVM installed. And the reason I did is because when I downloaded this, it had a readme.txt that said install KVM. The way you install KVM is there's actually kvm.command. And so I type KVM, and it says, OK, installed. Okay. So KVM, if I say KVM list, I only have one version of this K thing installed. If you're asking what's all this K business, that's because originally they had this thing called Project Katana, and it's kind of expanded out, and so then they started calling everything K. It'll probably get a new name later on, but I kind of like it. So here I have one instance, but I could have 20 different K runtimes installed. Okay. So now I'm going to, inside my application here, I'll change directories into samples, and I'll say kpm restore. So kpm is the K package manager, and it's going out and it's restoring all my NuGet packages. All right, now I'm going to go into the simplest example. This is actually just a console application. So if I say k run program, no, I should have said k run. Well, anyhow, it worked. It says, and if we want to see what's in there, if I say copy program, okay, so console write hello world. Now let's look at a web app. So if I go, so let's take a look at hello web. So all right, so we have two files in here. One is project.json, so let's look at that. Okay, so and I apologize if looking at a console screen at the end of the day is putting you to sleep. I'm not going to do too much more. But here we list our dependencies and packages. This is exactly like packages.config that we saw earlier. Then we have some commands, and here we can list out different commands. So here when I type kweb, it's going to host the server and run it at localhost 5001. And then finally down here, this is where I say these are my kind of runtime things. This will run on the K runtime, and it'll also run on .NET 4.5. So now let's look at my site. I have an image, and I have startup.cs. So let's look at that. Okay, so this is very lightweight. It says use static files. So it's saying, you know, this website is allowed to serve static files. And then it's calling this use welcome page. So this is kind of a handy little thing we did to make it easy to, you know, hello world. So if I say kweb, this is starting its own self-host server. Now, this will, of course, run on IIS as well, but this is kind of handy for testing or whatever. So if I go to localhost, and I think it's 5001. What? Yes? What is happening? Let's try that again. Maybe it was 5002. Let's go back to 1. There it is. What happened there, guys? Sorry. Okay, so here's this simple hello world page. Okay, and this is because we said show welcome page. Let's look at one more, and this one is the it's a simple MVC application. So if I go, so if I say, okay, so this has controllers, models, views, startup. If I go and look at a controller, so this is a standard MVC controller. This is, you know, this is basic MVC. So the point of the earlier stuff was, hey, crazy new stuff. The point of this demo is this is still MVC and it's still running on all this new stuff, right? So if I go back and I say, okay, web, so this is going to spin up. Now actually, I didn't type KPM restore on this one. I'd previously done it. This one pulls in more packages because it's got full MVC support, it's got identity, login, all that stuff, right? So now if I go, well, not that. Okay. I believe this is 5002. One. All their samples are either 5001 or 2. Okay? So that's that. Let me just, well, and so, you know, this is a standard. When I do this demo and I have more time, I actually go in and just start messing around with the controller. And actually, right now, the stuff about the file watching and recompiling is not built in. So I actually do, you know, I stop the server and run it. But it stops and restarts really quickly. So that's a general idea. If you're interested in this stuff, I recommend you go to asp.net/vnext, and they have 3 different little walkthroughs. So there's this kind of getting started. You can download it and run it locally. And then there's also music store and bug tracker samples. And so they'll kind of take you in more depth. Okay. So the goal, if you're looking at, oh no, John's typing in a console window, what is going on with ASP.NET? This is just a beginning early look. And this will all work in Visual Studio. You'll do file new project, create web application, and you'll type away just like we did all day long today. But the point of this is actually kind of a pretty amazing reboot underneath, you know, what's been running ASP.NET. So then now it's really lightweight, really fast, open source, lots of other crazy stuff. Kind of neat? Yep. Thoughts? Anyone scared of this? Anyone think it's neat? Anyone think it's good? All right. I think, yeah, I think, you know, you can see definitely some inspiration, I think, from Node, if you've used Node, Node.js. As some examples like the package restorations, all that, you know, the package management, multiple versions. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so we have talked about a ton of stuff today. So now let's bring this all into some kind of coherent ending if we can. So we go in Office Remote. I don't know what it is, but every time I do this, and the Bluetooth, and the phone, and the kids, this is the future. Okay, so what's next? Okay, so we'll talk about what we saw, some resources, and I'll try and get you to do some other things. So we talked about, you know, Visual Studio. I showed you web tools, showed you the one ASP.NET experience there. We looked at, you know, one slide at the beginning about NuGet, but the whole rest of the day, everything we were showing off, all the new features, we've really moved so that everything you use in ASP.NET or .NET in general is using NuGet. ASP.NET, of course, and then Azure. And what we did have one session towards the end of the day where it was really kind of like, here are a lot of Azure services. But what we like to do as part of this is just Azure is just a part of your web development flow, right? You can get free Azure, 10 free Azure websites. You can, if you have MSDN, you can get a lot more. Even if you're paying for them, they're incredibly cheap. Scott Hanselman's done some, he did a blog post where it was called Penny Pinching in the Cloud, and he talks about how he runs all of his websites, and they get a lot of traffic. And he runs some on Azure websites and pays 30 cents, 45 cents, you know, basically nothing for these sites. And it's because they're really, really efficient. Another great example is this guy, Troy Hunt. Does anyone know Troy Hunt? He has this, I'll show this real quick. He has this site called Have I Been Honed? And the idea is, the idea here is, now that every single website in the world is getting hacked all the time, I can go in and I can say, all right, let's put in my spam email. This one has probably been hacked on every site ever. Okay, so, right? So what he's done is, when these sites get hacked, they'll have these people will, the evil hackers will post the hashes up on the internet, the password hashes. And then Troy is a good guy. He will go out and he will also crack through these hash lists and find just the email addresses, and he'll store the email addresses, not the passwords or anything, but he'll store, here are the email addresses associated with it. And then when you can go up and look at on his site and you can see. So what's kind of neat is what he's done with this takes a good amount of processing power in order to spin all that up. And so it's probably a little ways back now. But he went through and explained how he did this site, and he actually, well, I don't know, somewhere in here. The idea is he actually downloaded all the data. He took a tiny little sample of it and ran one tiny VM against it, and made sure that everything worked. Tested that out, and then he had gigabytes to process. He spun up 4 large virtual machine instances or something, pointed them all at the data, ran it for an hour, and then shut it all down. He paid, I think, $3 for this, right? A huge amount of processing power with these huge instances, and then shut it down. So the example of what you can do with Azure is amazing, because it gives you all this kind of flexibility to use what you want, and then when you're done, stop using it. Okay, so, yeah, we already saw this. We saw ASP.NET. The idea is there's common core. We talked about some common things. And then we looked at several different things, some different applications, building sites, hosting services, et cetera, all running on this kind of common ASP.NET. So I think of ASP.NET as kind of this platform that can do a lot of things for us. Okay. So some things you can do. Obviously build, have fun playing with this. There's a lot that's in. If you do file new project in Visual Studio, there's a lot in there for you. Contribute. Like I mentioned, if you are excited, if you have code you've written that is neat and you want to share it, NuGet's a great way to do that. It's very easy to publish a package on NuGet. If you are interested and have questions, ping me, email, Twitter, talk to me now, and I would help. And like I mentioned, a lot of the cool features that are happening in ASP.NET and Visual Studio are happening from open source contributions. You can keep up with ASP.NET specifically on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and of course the ASP.NET site. The WebCamp training kit. So this link, and I'm thinking about maybe changing it. This link right now, if you browse to it, it'll just download this executable. And it's a small one because it's maybe a few 100K. And what that will do then is pop up this web platform installer and download the WebCamp training kit. It's about 30 megabytes. It's not too huge. It's the source code, slides. Matt and I have been making tons of updates just this past week to get you kind of this, like for instance, I just showed you this new ASP.NET stuff that just came out, right? Or just was announced. So there are some things that we still need to go back and update onto that. But the WebCamp training kit was, I think, last updated in March, so pretty current. Azure, of course, azure.microsoft.com. And there are a ton of tutorials and things there. If you have any questions about Azure, there is a huge amount of documentation there. I want to remind you, if you have MSDN and you're not using your Azure benefits, it's just sad. In the ASP.NET site. So I have a special fondness for the ASP.NET site. I kind of help decide what content goes there and how we organize it. If you have content you think we should link to, if you write a cool blog post and you think we should put it on the front page for a week, if you, you know, don't like something about it, let me know. I'd be happy to get it fixed. Oh, and one other thing is, I mean, I know everyone here speaks incredible English, but if you're more comfortable reading in Finnish or another language, we have this language drop down here. And we have a translate widget on just about every page. So that's something that's relatively, you know, it's using the Microsoft Research translator, and it's pretty good, I think. How would I know? That's it for the day. So I would like, we're actually slightly early because that conclusion, you know, was pretty quick. I'm happy if you want to leave. If you have questions, it'd be great. Matt or I could answer them. If they're hard questions, Matt will answer them. You have any thoughts, questions? You want to leave? Okay. I guess please come down and just talk to us. We'd be happy to, you know, hear your questions and feedback. So, thanks a lot.